Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get our complimentary newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.
Financial Survival Network is presented to you by Regal Assets. Buy and sell physical gold and silver through your existing retirement plan, 100% tax-free with Regal Assets. If you want to include physical gold or silver in your existing IRA or old 401k, request your free investment kit, which was recently featured in the Forbes and Smart Money Wall Street Journal magazines. Call toll-free 855-678-6620, 855-678-6620, or visit regalassets.com. We're all concerned about hyperinflation, gold going up, loss of faith in fiat currency, and the money supply. Well, as my next guest will demonstrate to you, nobody really knows what the money supply is because nobody can define money anymore. Martin Armstrong spent a lifetime examining cycles, seeing economic systems implode and others get built up. He's with us now. Martin, welcome back to financialsurvivalnetwork.com.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to come back.
Hey, always a pleasure to have you, too. So we are really in a strange place in this economic cycle, aren't we?
Yes, I think largely the problem that exists is that when we had Bretton Woods in 1944, all the countries sat down and actually designed a monetary system. They created the World Bank and the IMF, and they said, okay, fine, this is how this will work, et cetera. And they fixed gold at $35 and said, okay, fine, so therefore the dollar will be the reserve currency. And all that sounded nice. Then the politicians, and this is what's the problem with the gold standard, is that, you know, they continue to print money, and eventually there was far more money than there was if you at $35 an ounce. So they had to then close the gold window in 1971, which was supposed to be temporary. And that has had a profound impact because nobody at that point in time sat down and designed anything. And they said, okay, fine, this is temporary, we'll see what happens. And then you had Nixon going through, Watergate and so many crises developing, OPEC, et cetera, so that by the end of the decade, politicians just looked at it and said, well, I don't know, it's working, we don't know how, but it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in the 60s, if you had government savings bonds and you went to a bank and you tried to borrow on them, you couldn't. You know, that was not acceptable. And today, you have China, all the various countries, they say the dollar is a reserve currency, but what are they actually keeping? Not real dollars. They're actually keeping government bonds.
Right.
So what's happened post-1971 is that even if you want to trade in an exchange, you can keep your money in T-bills, and T-bills are acceptable now as collateral to trade. So that means the debt is actually money. As opposed to in the 60s, you got a savings bond. It's not money because you can't even borrow against it. You had to cash it in. Today, you can post it. So money supply, people can try and define it M1, M3, whatever you want to call it. That's very nice. But we are so far beyond all of that. And nobody can really define it because, if you're sitting in Japan and you want to buy dollars, you just call the bank, you say, okay, fine, and you put on a trade, and that's now an electronic entry in your account. The Fed doesn't actually create dollars. So dollars could be created from, in an instant.
Mm-hmm. So there's no checks and balances on the creation of money anymore.
So a lot of these arguments about fiat and stuff, I don't even think people understand the system is so far gone that I don't know if there's a way to actually calculate how money is even created anymore, because they don't print it. It's not actually created even by the Federal Reserve. I mean, they create it by buying, bonds, of course, but I mean, there's other levels even far beyond that now. So it's so complicated. And this is one of the reasons I think, a lot of people are saying that go back to the gold standard. Now, I mean, you do that, we're just going to get wiped out. Because quite frankly, if I'm sitting there with a whole bunch of bonds and you go back to the gold standard, I'm cashing them in, taking the gold, and say thank you very much.
Well, we're going to get wiped no matter what happens.
Fort Knox would be wiped out in a day, and then what are you going to do?
But the system is going to collapse here because it's this runaway freight train, heading for a mountain, and there's nobody trying to put the brakes on. In fact, the locomotive doesn't have any brakes, and it doesn't have a reverse gear, and it can only keep going faster and faster into oblivion. So where are we going to wind up here? We're going to collapse either way, aren't we?
Yes, we're going to end up. I think the only difference is that if you collapse this way, at least maybe Fort Knox is still there, But,
maybe.
But we have to get to the point where. I know, a lot of people also say, oh, we're going into hyperinflation. But the thing I don't understand is that hyperinflation, if you look at Germany and Zimbabwe, et cetera, the reason they go into hyperinflation is that there's nobody there to buy their bonds.
Mm-hmm.
We still have, the United States is the place where all money is parked, more so than any other country in the world. So, you're talking about pension funds. Tremendous amount of money is invested in this $15 trillion.
Right.
And the bulk of supposedly conservative money, all right, is in bonds.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was old Jesse, Livermore, or no, it wasn't Jesse Livermore. I think it was Mellon. He said the gentlemen
prefer bonds, huh?
Prefer bonds. But it's true. That's where the supposed conservative money is, and that's what's going to get blown up. And this is why what we're seeing around the world at the federal level and at the state and local levels is that government is getting very, very aggressive. Taxes are going up. They're going after, Greece is now retroactively going back to tax property back to 2008. France, they realized that people were buying gold, so now they put in a new law that anybody who wants to sell gold, they can no longer pay in cash. That has to be by check, so they can get their pound of flesh.
So it's going to lead to a black market in all precious metals, which means a free market.
The bullion market in France is collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's running off to Belgium now. And then they'll put pressure on Belgium where they can buy gold over the counter and pay up to 25,000 euros in cash.
Right.
That's coming down to 10 by next year. Will probably be 3.
Mm-hmm.
So all these governments, instead of reforming, they're first going to come after us.
Right. Yeah, well, the buck stops here with us, right?
Right, and until you get to the point where something's going to happen and say, enough's enough, I'm madder than hell, like that old movie,
Network.
That's largely where we're going to be looking at in the years ahead. And it's a real classic problem. And this is why I've written that core economies never go down with hyperinflation. They absolutely just implode. That's how Rome collapsed. If you read Edward Gibbons, he says the courts became corrupt. They charged everybody with everything for fines and fees, and then people left.
Right.
That is what the term in the English language are called suburbs. In Latin, it's suburbium, meaning that the people began to flee the cities. Because they were getting away from the taxation.
Yeah, and the exploitation and And, it's interesting because people do vote with their feet, even though progressives, so-called progressives, say that, oh, I'm not going to move from New York to Florida or to New Hampshire to avoid the income tax and all the other taxes that local governments impose. I won't do that because I love New York so much that I'll take whatever abuse they heap upon me. And I'm here to tell you that I'm giving serious thought to getting out of the state because it's unsustainable. All these states are going to collapse economically. Is there any question about it with the pension funds and everything else?
And this is why it's not just the United States, it's every country. They have all adopted since World War II this idea that they can just borrow perpetually and never pay anything off.
Yeah, that's the buy now, pay never plan, I call that.
And you can get a World Almanac, and it will give you the interest paid on the national debt every year. We added it up. About 70% of the entire national debt that we owe is interest.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't even go to helping the poor and creating social programs and education and all this stuff that they stand up and makes it sound, we're here to help you.
It goes to the bankers.
Goes to the bankers.
The bankers.
Exactly.
Well, Ellen Brown, I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She's done a lot of work on central banking, and she says if we should just borrow the money and not pay interest on it, the national debt, that somehow that's going to work out okay. But I have doubts that if you have unfettered ability to just print money and spend it, that's going to work out any better, even though we've got 70% of the national debt being interest.
I mean, if you essentially said that, quite honestly, if you want to look at a pure system, you'd have to work out the numbers. But even taxation has become antiquated.
Oh, yeah.
You needed taxation when money was gold because you had to get some of it back to spend it. Mm-hmm. If we're just printing it, then why are we spending money collecting taxes anyhow? I mean, you should, 40% of the people...
We're printing 60% of it anyway, right? Or 50%? Just print it all.
We should just print what we need, and that's it. The national debt would be a third of what it is today, and there wouldn't be any taxes.
Yeah, I've thought about that one, but don't you eventually get inflation that way too? You'd have to get inflation.
You're going to have inflation, but you're going to have inflation any way, shape, or form. So, but at least it's controllable, and you understand what it is.
All right, so here's the hypothetical, Martin. The system's going to collapse. We know that. You and I agree, as well as many, many experts. It collapses. What are we going to have then? Do we go back to a fixed money supply? Do we cut the financial sector down to the bare minimum so that they can't entice people to become debt slaves? Because we've got this whole generation of kids who are in hock up to their eyeballs in debt that can never be discharged in bankruptcy, in debt that they will never pay off in their lives. They're never going to get a tax refund. They're not even going to get Social Security because you can deduct 15% of the Social Security payment to go towards paying off student loans. So when you're 100, you're still going to be paying off your student loans. What do we do here? We have to start with a blank slate, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I say that, forget the gold standard. That's not going to work. We have to talk about, actually debt restructuring. I mean, it's the whole fundamental system that has to be basically rebuilt from scratch. It's not what money is, and it doesn't matter if it's conch shell.
Part 2 is available to subscribers of FinancialSurvivalNetwork.com. Go there now, sign up, and enjoy.